Welcome to Forward Thinking, taking a deep dive into some of the biggest challenges facing real estate and tech today. We meet some of the most inspiring minds in a bid to find sustainable solutions. Well, good morning, Rob.
Morning.
We are back for another session of our Forward Thinking series, and I'm delighted to welcome Rob Stark.
Nice to be here.
Who has a very, very long title. Director of
Strategy and Operations.
Yeah. for MAPP.
Correct.
So that's quite a big job then.
Yeah.
What is that? Your day to day. What does that entail then?
Day to day. Well, look, just casting my mind back slightly, when Nigel invited me to join MAPP, if you like, he said the role was pretty much what I wanted to make it. But they knew they had a lot of space that they needed to grow in, and so it became a kind of strategy and operations role in the sense that roughly half my role is looking at the outside world, the macro environmental factors impacting the way that MAPP runs its business, and trying to make sense of that. So sorting the signal from the noise, if you like. And the second, much more difficult bit, is the operational piece, which is actually working out, once we've set the strategy in motion for the business, how do we actually make that work in practice operationally? And that's where the rubber hits the road, to use that cliche, and that's where it becomes challenging in terms of.
But what a fantastic role! I mean, obviously, we've been working together for quite a few years now. But it's almost a dream role. So you've got that sort of holistic R&D, what's going on in the market, and then the ability and the authority to then implement some of those, or bring those to reality, I guess.
No, I'm very lucky. We've got a quite high degree of latitude here and delegated authority, and in all roles, but in mine as well. And so the ability not only to go to market and understand what's happening, but then to bring that back to base, as it were, and try to land it successfully, means that the role is different from day to day, from week to week.
Yeah, must be very varied.
And keeps you on your toes, for sure.
Yeah. And has it evolved? Because obviously you came in, how long have you been here now? 8, 9 years?
No, 6 years. It might
6 years.
It feels like 8 or 9 in a sense. 6 years actually this month, as it happens.
Right.
Although you can take a view on the impact of COVID in terms of what our strategic plan was at the time. I certainly had a 5-year vision, if you like, and we're probably 4.5 years into that 5-year vision. In a sense, has it changed? Yes and no. It's only changed because the scale of the business has changed dramatically since I started. When I started, we were 210, 215 people, and we've just passed 650.
Wow.
And there's a lot more in the pipeline. So in that sense, the growth has driven the decision-making process to different levels. But our ambition remains identical to as it was 25 years ago when Nigel set the business up.
Come back to the growth in a little bit, because I think that's what everybody wants to hear about. The Rob Stark story then.
Such as it is.
Did you always want to be Director of Strategy and Operations for a British?
I always wanted to be
managing agent when you were a little boy.
No, well, look, I mean, we worked with Resurgo. Just by way of a bit of background, we worked with Resurgo.
Can we go a little bit further back? So you're born and raised.
Yeah, born and raised in New Zealand.
Okay. North Island, South Island.
North Island in Auckland, where I lived for 26 years before I came to the UK.
So you did all your qualifications there?
Well, I didn't really qualify at anything. I left school quite early and fell into some work. Eventually ended up working as a kind of company accountant for a small business called Jones Lang Wootton in Auckland.
Yes.
Who happened to be in real estate. It wasn't an ambition of mine to work in real estate. If I had an ambition at all, it was to be an architect. But then I looked at how difficult it was. And when you're young, you make a decision. So I fell into property management, or real estate, if you like, on the corporate side. I managed to get a transfer from what was then the Jones Lang Wootton office to the Jones Lang LaSalle office in London in '99. I didn't like the big business mentality when I arrived, so I moved within about 12 or 18 months to a business called Nelson Bakewell. Which was a property management-led real estate business.
Again,
of a
remember and know a lot of people who worked there.
Which was a great place to be in the 2000s. And again, on a very similar growth trajectory to the one that MAPP's on now, in terms of we ended up being roughly 800 people at the time we were bought in 2010 by Capita.
And a very different approach. Nelson Bakewell seemed to, have an identity that was agile, entrepreneurial, innovative, and away from the more, some would say, the more staid approach of the larger established management.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a multidisciplinary firm, unquestionably, but it was still focused on management, which is kind of the bread and butter in terms of cash flow, and gives a different decision-making process to the people involved in that business, because the focus is in that particular area, as opposed to perhaps some of the transactional consultancy type work as you see elsewhere. So there's a different set of stakeholders involved for sure in the decision-making process. But I went from quite junior finance roles, increasingly into running big teams for large investor clients, big finance teams, and then you kind of get bored, if that's the right word, but you get curious about how to do other things in the business. You end up becoming operational, so I had oversight of FM and PM and IT particularly, and it's kind of just, if you've got the ability to go where you find things that you're curious about, and the business gives you the opportunity to do that, then you kind of leap at it.
No, I agree. Again, coming into the MAPP environment, did Nigel have a specific plan to say, right, we want to have a growth plan here and that's what we want to achieve, or was it, let's, in a bit, a sort of familiar sort of way of surround yourself with capable people and stuff will happen? And that's been my sort of mantra over the last sort of 15 years, I guess.
I guess that's part of it. There's never been a growth plan at MAPP, and there still isn't one. It's always been, Nigel's mantra from day one has been the people, planet, profit kind of triangle, that paradigm which we sit within and try and make sure that it's relatively well balanced. You can't look after your people and you make some kind of profit, clearly. But the planet, in terms of the ESG aspect, features really highly, as does the charitable work that Nigel does and the business does as well. So the ambition is just to be really, really good at what we do, and because we only do property management, really, at scale, in terms of 95% of the business, then if you're not good at that, you're out of business. So it kind of motivates your thinking pretty heavily in a way that perhaps might not do if you've got other strands to fall back on.
Do you think that is your main USP then? Is the fact that you just focus on the property management?
I think it's one of 3 or 4 core USPs, the fact that every single decision we make is for the property management business, which means it's for the people who are in this entire business. They know that all we're thinking about is them. They know that when we invest in technology or in people or in process, that's for the benefit of them, not for another strand of the business somewhere else that doesn't necessarily have a positive outcome for them. So all our thinking is about the folks that we work with day to day.
And what do you find? So now you're building, and you say you have the plan is not complete, and there are more irons in the fire and everything else. What are you finding are the main challenges now in terms of growing a business from 250 to 600, 700 people, developing more and more clients? You've got more systems, you've got more people, you've got more offices. What are the main sort of day-to-day challenges that come across your desk?
I think the day-to-day challenge is probably much the same as it ever was, which is just about finding good people, and then ensuring that they're a good fit for the type of business that we want to be in terms of the social responsibility aspects of the business, in terms of how we want to pull together as a team and how we want to play together, and that they've got a focus on our market, as opposed to this is a stepping stone perhaps to something else. They don't want to do property management, but they're here for 3 years and then they want to move on. So we're very committed to finding the right people for the business, which reflects obviously on our clients, because we don't have a sales team, as you'll know. There isn't. I mean, there's a small marketing and comms team, but that really is about comms as opposed to trying to sell us to the external world. So all our growth is predicated on word of mouth. It's all organic, and that means that everyone we employ really is kind of our salesperson in a sense. And if they're able to do a good job.
It's interesting, isn't it? For us, it's definitely changed. In terms of the number of people that are out there, but also, as you're saying, the skill set. And you said it's down to the universities, whether that's just down to the UK education. I don't know, but certainly getting those. We get a lot of people from hospitality, from retail, side, and I went to the MIPIM years and years, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and we were asking the hotel people where they got their people from, and they said they got people from the airlines. Because again, their training is very good. So I don't know where the airlines get them from. So we didn't follow it all the way up.
They create them, I think.
But they train them.
They train
and
them.
they spend the money on training them.
Absolutely. There's certainly a space that we're recruiting from for front of house and other roles as well, increasingly from the hospitality sector.
Yeah.
And we've had an eye to that for 3 or 4 years now.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it's the people skills, really. Once you've got the people skills, you can actually do a lot with that.
Yeah, well, we're looking for personality because you can provide a lot of the skills in terms of training internally.
Yeah.
So we're looking for the right type of personality first and foremost, and we can often fit the rest around. But it's that's always going to be the challenge, I think, and that's probably true for most businesses.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. So in terms of Nigel's vision, what's the next thing here?
Yeah,
I remember we were given a quote about him saying in 2022 that property management has finally sort of stepped up and is now on the big boys table of
I think
services.
Well, the market, I think it's genuinely accepted that the market has changed in terms of occupier expectations and their ability to drive demand rather than respond to it. And it's something that I've been in property management since the mid-90s, dare I say. So I've been through those cycles where we're seen as a hygiene factor. You do the bare minimum and you run the site and the lease comes up every 5 or 10 years and there's very little contact other than collecting the rent and the service charge. And that's a tough environment to operate because there's not a huge amount of effort or impetus placed on from clients or investment into the property management world. And I think some of that has played back poorly for them and for the industry more widely. And in the last 5 years, what we've finally seen, I think, certainly what we've experienced is a greater focus on higher levels of service, which is exactly where MAPP has always wanted to be. And that kind of customer relationship management piece, because actually you have to engage with occupiers to get them back to sites now, particularly in office spaces, but in other spaces as well. And I think that's a much better environment for us to operate in terms of our ability to provide high service levels as opposed to one that's just the kind of cheapest possible provision. It
is definitely a theme across this, that you've got the sort of the big buildings that are doing quite well because they're refurbed, they're looking very nice, they've got lots of different facilities and amenities, and most people are pretty happy with that, and they've probably got a 20% sort of co-working space in there. And then you've got your tier two buildings that are in this kind of this position with what do we do? And then you've got the tier 3 buildings that are just almost sort of the bottom end now. And do you have the same sort of issue? So what I'm asking, I guess the question is how do you, with the tier 1 buildings, they're fine because they have sort of their own sort of microcosms and they exist. Yeah. But the tier 2s and the tier 3s are going through some sort of identity crisis at the moment. Certainly in London, we were at a CPA event last night, and that is definitely the case of what do you do with other people, and is it a change of use, and what happens, and there are we've moved out as a business ourselves. We've moved out of a big space in the middle of Oxford. We're now in a co-working space because most people, if you want to engage with them and you want to recruit them and have them work for you, you've got to listen to what their terms are as well. You can't just say that you've got to come into the office 5 days a week or 4 days a week. Actually, it's now 1 or 2 days a week, in which case, why do you have just a massive space? Yeah. So, and if we're doing that and we're 35, 40 people and we've got maybe, 10, 11 people coming in at any one time, you just don't need the space. And that's got to be reflected sort of nationally and within what's going on. So there must be huge swathes of empty, good quality office space. So what do you do with that? Or what are you advising your clients to do with that? It's not because it's we're in the engagement business. We're both in the engagement business. And I would say, well, you've got to put some tech in there and make it more efficient, and you can judge when people are coming in and get some enlivenment in there and everything else. That goes so far, but at the end of the day, if you just don't have the footfall of people going in, what do they do?
Yeah. Well, the first answer to that question is that, of course, we're not a consultancy firm in the sense. No. So we're not actually telling our clients what they should do with those few office spaces that they've got that are going to be really hard to activate or to provide some kind of future-proof plan for. We will do everything within our power, of course, to make that space work within the context of the scheme and the other occupiers and the surrounding area. But there's a limit to how much you can do when you're only working with the fabric of the building and the common areas, and that's why we've rolled out the Flex product, and we're looking at becoming what I would call a full service provider, which is where we're trying to inject our services into the occupier space as well, so that we can provide the kind of cradle to grave service, and the occupiers don't have to worry about anything, whether it's from furniture to soft supplies to anything else that goes on in that, because that's not what they're there to do anyway. Most of them are only doing it off the side of their desk, or maybe they've got an office manager who has to run around and do things that they're not necessarily experts at, whereas we are, and that's what we do day in, day out. So there's different services we can provide into those sites to help make them work for occupiers and make potentially attract them back. But ultimately the paradigm has changed now. And if we're only talking about offices, we're talking about a relatively small part of the overall real estate sector that's impacted by this. We've taken more space because we're a growing business, so that's a luxury. The logistics of saying that we've got 40 staff and therefore we need 40 spaces, but they're only ever going to be 20 at a time, I can see the logic to that, but the counter logic to that is that some days you will want everyone in, and therefore you can't afford not to have that space. So there will be a balance to be struck, in my view, between, okay, we're going to have to pay for the space and it won't be fully utilised all the time, fact, but actually 90% of our staff, our cost of staff anyway, and only 5 to 9% is rent and service charge. So that's an overhead that we're prepared to bear in terms of ensuring that we've got the right space for when people are in.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
But people will be taking more flexible terms for sure, and there's some interesting offers popping up now where you can lease day by day.
I know.
Whether you want that for a HQ type space is unlikely.
Yeah.
But if you've only got a handful of staff, then it's probably viable. But you're absolutely right.
So what are they?
The second and third order effects.
So that kind of covers a thin seam of client stuff in terms of what they are. But the major problem is still the fact that people are just deserting the sinking ship.
I think that's one way of putting it for sure. It's there are other boats in the ocean, and some of those are little.
They are.
To continue that analogy, working from home is not going to go away.
No.
In my view, it might be counter to some views at various banks and investment houses.
And tech houses as well, wasn't it?
And so we need to work with
the head of Apple was saying that.
Some companies have got more leverage.
You've got to come in every day, and it's like, oh, that's going to go down well.
Yeah, look, if I'm paid £750,000 a year, then I'm probably going to go to the office as well.
Yeah.
And that's just the way that the industry works, which is fine. But for everyone else, particularly in a market that's quite competitive still for recruitment. The first question or second question will be asked before salaries almost.
Yep.
Will be what's the policy on remote working and agile working, and we've still got the policy that no one's required to come to the office, bearing in mind that our business has always been surveyors on the road, FMs on the road, people working remotely, people working on site. So it's the kind of...
I remember having this conversation with you a couple of years ago, mid-COVID,
yeah.
and I was saying, have you managed to furlough everybody? He said, well, no, because they've still got to be out there inspecting and visiting properties, meeting up with people and everything else.
Busier than ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for us, that was a relatively easy decision to make. I can say that now with the benefit of hindsight. But if presenteeism doesn't work. Right. You either know what your staff are doing and what their targets are, or you don't. And having them sitting in the office doesn't help with that. It helps with a host of other things that we're really concerned about, like how we pull together as a business, what the team ethos is like, what's the culture of the business like, which is really important for technically a smaller business like MAPP, as opposed to maybe some of the larger guys, because it's what attracts people to this space. Some of the best experiences I've had with teams working with people have been in really crappy offices, working from basements.
Yep.
It's not about the office space.
But that's the bunker mentality, isn't it? And
it can be.
Come on,
Absolutely, it can be.
Start small and build it up.
So that's still a key driver for us, and it will be for a lot of other organisations who, since people are working from home and they're drifting away from, that guiding light, if you like, such as it is, it's still a job, and you've got to be realistic about that. But to really motivate people to go to the extra mile, you've got to get them a little bit sticky.
So going back to those tier 2 and tier 3 buildings, what do you think is going to happen to those over the next?
Well, there's an enormous amount of, all our clients are talking about conversion of use and have been for some time. Some have been deliberately buying sites for years now with that in mind, and whether that's...
And you're talking about converting into resi here?
Probably.
Okay.
It's typically mixed use, depending on the location.
So you could, from a holistic point of view, you could say that's a good thing then, because actually you're bringing the life back into these sort of urban centres.
Yeah, I mean that's always, the urban village concept, the 15-minute city, all that stuff that's in the press at the moment is great. How cost effective they are, what the floor plate sizes are, whether the daylight accessible, all those other things. There's some real challenges there, and there will be mixed use where it's retail, offices and resi. There will be some that will be knocked down and put back up again. There will be some centres that just things start to die off, and we've seen it in other areas in the UK for sure, where even now they haven't recovered from things that happened in the 80s in terms of economic impacts. So it's a very long term, it's not a 5-year fix.
And is this, are you, because I know that you sort of spread your sort of geographic wings into sort of Bristol and Scotland and Manchester, Birmingham.
Yep.
So now you've got offices. How many offices have you got now? 6. 6. So are you seeing the same sort of patterns? Or is this just a London phenomena?
If we're talking about return to offices specifically, the return to offices in the regions is slightly higher because you would have seen this in the press. The problem isn't the office, it's the commute. Yeah. Well, at least that's one of the catchphrases that people tend to hang on to. And I absolutely understand that. If you've got an hour and a half through London traffic each way, as opposed to a 30-minute drive potentially in some of the regions, or a 30-minute train, there's a difference there. But it's not a substantial order of return higher in the regions. The same factors are still playing out. If you've got an office that's 50% occupied as opposed to 40% occupied, you're kind of still you've still got the same problem from an investment perspective. So I think that doesn't really change the metrics from the client side. They need 80% plus really to make the numbers stand up. So I think half of our portfolio is regional, but again, probably only 35% of our portfolio is offices.
Okay.
There's a substantial proportion that's in science parks and business parks, retail, some residential.
And is that a deliberate strategy? Is to actually diversify?
It's responsive to client.
Right.
We don't get to choose what the clients buy, and we don't just yet get to pick and choose the clients.
That was my next question.
We're sensitive to the types of clients we work with, and there are certain types of clients who don't want to work with us, and that probably works both ways because they're not necessarily the best fit for us either. So as it happens, we've got a really broad spectrum of assets under management, which are quite equally spread, which works for us, and geographically roughly 50% outside London, 50% inside the kind of M25. So again, fairly well insulated in a sense from impacts in any one sector or geographic area. But that's because clients have, they've got investment funds that they need to spread the risk on as well. So we're following that.
And just UK?
Just UK.
And no desire to go anywhere else?
The UK is a big market. I've dabbled in Europe before in previous roles. I know how tough it is. It's very localised. You've got to have a big footprint to do it properly. It's not that we wouldn't say no if the right offer came up, but nothing even close to attractive has done. And while we're still doing well, if you like, and we've still got ambitions in the UK market, it seems like it would be a distraction to do anything differently.
So you have clients that obviously have global or international footprints.
Yeah, quite a few.
Who then just say, can you manage the UK arm?
Yeah, it's very much, it plays to, our focus has always been, we're specialists, and that means specialists in terms of the market as well as property management. So we can't pretend to be specialists in France or Spain or, in the US or anywhere else. If we were, we would certainly go there. But we're specialists in the UK market.
It's interesting because people ask, obviously, we're a tech business, as you're well aware, and people say, so you're just in the UK? And I almost sort of get that slightly sort of dismayed.
I know.
Oh, well, you're obviously very small then because you're not global. And it's just like my choice is not, similar to MAPP's, is the UK market is huge. Why else would we want to go? So if clients are saying, well, we've got stuff in the States or Australia or Singapore or Europe, and it's like, okay, fine, we'll go. But I'm not going to go and step out there because I think there is huge scope and huge opportunity in terms of what we do, similar to your attitude. But it's quite funny, isn't it, where they say, oh, we're a global player, so we've got to have global agents. And actually, well, yeah, you don't. And I was talking there was a guy from a big agency, one of the incubator sort of technology part of it, and he was saying, well, obviously, no, it's a canvas, isn't it? It's a sort of similar canvas. And I was going, well, actually, no, it's not a similar canvas because you've got different, compliance and regulations coming in. And one of the things that we were sort of quite into is the golden thread, so the safety acts. And that's not a US thing, that's not a Singapore thing, that's not an Australian, that's a UK thing. And there are UK businesses that have to comply with that. So no, it's very different. And if they're using global companies, they may not realize that's coming in and they've got to do something about that. So no, I've always felt that, UK, stay with that because there is more than enough opportunity here.
Yeah, that's certainly where we are at the moment. There's plenty for us to do. The market has grown for us at the same time as we've grown. The scale of the type of clients we're working with now has changed as well and grown. And there are a lot of funds, whether they're between £500 million to £2 or £3 billion funds, where we're quite an attractive proposition because if they go to one of the other agents, they're potentially 50th on the order of priority.
Yep.
And there are a lot of good people at those businesses, but they're still not going to get the visibility that they might want.
Yeah.
Whereas with us, they will sit in the top 10.
The same personal, touch or approach that you can give them.
Yeah, and we do recruit at a more senior level. So there tends to be more senior people working on the funds that we manage, which delivers a slightly higher cost base, but actually we think a much better service for the clients.
And retention? Is retention good?
Yes, we believe so. I mean, from what you can get, what you can glean from market statistics from the agencies we work with, the average turnover has been in the sector for as long as I've worked in it, certainly something like 18 to 20%.
Right.
Depending on the discipline, whether you're an FM or surveying. Bearing in mind that Chupi is a big feature of our market.
Yes.
Those are unavoidable transfers where they come with sites that you take on.
I guess it wasn't necessarily retention of employees or staff, it was retention of clients.
Retention of clients, we are, I think we're phenomenal.
Okay.
I think, we've lost one major client in 6 years.
Wow.
And it depends how much you want to say about a couple of others that we might have lost that we probably didn't mind going.
Okay.
Retention is excellent. A lot of our clients have grown from a handful of properties to over 100. So it's more about how the ones that we do have developed. Do they continue to give us work, or are they splitting funds up and breaking them off to other agents? And so we've got an excellent record both in retention of the larger funds, but also in growing the smaller funds to scale, which is a big feature of what we do because they like that hands-on approach.
And on most people, so let's move on to another sort of big theme, which is ESG. So I know that you guys take it very, you're actually active in this area rather than a lot of people I think are ticking the box rather than actually doing anything which is sort of more tangible. Are you finding that clients are understanding this more these days, or is it still you are trying to implement it and they're saying, okay, what's the sort of the minimum we have to do here to comply? Or
do you mean the S and the sustainability piece particularly? Yeah. I mean, look, our sustainability team's grown from 2 to 16, 17 now, with more to come in the last 18 months or so. And again, that was a deliberate strategy because we can see what's happening in that space, in terms of legislative requirements, just meeting the bare minimum, never mind the value add that we want to provide. And the reality is now that when I go to see new clients and existing clients, which I do on a very regular basis because I'm involved in the BD aspects of the business as well, if we get an hour slot with clients, the first 45 minutes will be sustainability. So I have to take out
at their behest or yours?
Yeah, theirs.
Okay. In terms of saying what we need to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we're involved in putting together all the carbon plans and the net zero plans and everything else for our clients at a strategic level, but we're also involved in delivering those operationally, of course, on site. And the clients that we've got like the fact that it's not just a consultancy piece that's run off and then they've got to read through it and work out how they're actually going to deliver it on the ground. Mm-hmm. It's actually linked operationally to these are the tweaks we need to make to the sites to make this happen over the next 5 years. So we've got really good penetration in our existing market in terms of our existing client list. And we're also working for some clients who don't have their own sustainability teams that we don't operate for in a management sense. But need assistance. And frankly, I'm sure everyone else is doing the same thing, but you can't grow that part of the business fast enough to meet demand, which is great news in a sense, but it's a very slow-moving market because there's only a limited amount you can do with sites. And we're up against a pretty big challenge, as you'll be aware.
Well, that's heartening, because I must admit that from what I hear is that it's much more of a tick box exercise for a lot of people. But
I don't think it is anymore. I think you might have been right 5 years ago, right. In terms of they had to publish a board report or something market facing or provide it to their investors. The reality is the investors are asking really hard, the ultimate investors are asking really hard questions of the funds now, and you'll see comments from.
So you think this is more of a bottom up?
I think they're not going to get funded if they can't provide good answers to some of the questions that their investors
to their shareholders.
Are posing. So I do think they're being squeezed from both sides in that sense, which is great for the environment, but it's still incremental. Some of them have got plans for 2050, and 2050 is too late, as we all know.
Yep.
Really, and 2030 is pushing it.
Yep.
But we are where we are, and you can only move the levers so quickly. In reality, a lot of the sites aren't. It's not economically feasible to migrate to B. And so there are a lot of loopholes in the existing legislation, as you'll be aware, where they will have to work around that to make it work, and there will be stranded assets.
And do you think people are just saying, because I remember with the COVID thing, it was like sort of, there was some ambiguity around timings and everything else, and we as a small business just made a plan, and it was almost regardless, despite what was going on nationally, it was like, this is for the better of our people, this is what we're going to do, and we sent people home, I think, 10 days, 2 weeks before we went into sort of national lockdown because it was going that way. And do you think people are doing the same sort of thing? You're going, actually, we need to mandate this behaviour earlier, despite, even though the laws are saying we've got to do it by X, we're going to do it sort of 15, 20 years before then?
It varies.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you've got the moral and the financial sort of balance sitting there between. Yeah. Financially, it's not necessarily.
I think we've got just over 100 clients, and they've all got a slightly different approach.
Yeah.
And we've got the ones who've got green funds, and are obviously at the very forefront of this type of activity, and we've got the other ones who are very much led to it, kicking and screaming because they have to do it, and they've probably got stock that makes it really challenging to do it, frankly, and so they will all be quite rightly concerned about what they can actually achieve in reality. So we've got opposite ends of the spectrum, and we have to manage through that. And the reality is, there's a lot of the stat that's typically bandied around in terms of the built environment's contribution to carbon, which I think is set at something like 40% or something like that, worldwide carbon, is slightly unfair in the sense that it's actually the occupiers producing a significant proportion of that, not the building itself. The construction, of course, does, but once it's under management, it's not the client, even though the client has to report on the carbon, it's not the client who's actually producing it, it's the occupiers. And
so other things we wanted to talk about was your recent B Corp
accreditation.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit more about that resi transformation going on in terms of change of use. And then also, I wouldn't mind, it'd be quite interesting to talk to you because in terms of your strategic and operations side, I was involved, and we can go on to this now, involved in a UKPA debate recently. That was basically saying who is responsible for implementing the tech change or plan. And I know we have spoken about this at length with Locale and MAPP.
Yeah.
But actually, is it down to the propcos, or in this case, the agencies? Well, the agencies and the propcos, or is it down to the prop tech companies then to manage and be responsible for the implementation of technology within those portfolios and those individual buildings? Sure. So my argument was it's definitely not down to the prop tech companies.
Yeah.
Because I can't influence and create change. I can't force your hand to do stuff within what is effectively your demise. But where do you stand on this, or do you have a sort of a? You're going to say you're going to have a foot in both camps, don't you?
Yeah, I am going to say that.
I thought you might say that.
I am going to say that. I mean, obviously, ultimately, the strategy of the business that wants to implement the technology and deliver the change management, they have to own that for sure. You know, and that's what we certainly try and do. And you need to make it needs to be a good decision in the first place, and it needs to be something that the people, the end users, are involved in that process, so they don't feel like something's been dumped on them. And as you know from our conversations, MAPP's approach to technology is very agnostic. So we need to use technology where it's to our advantage rather than kind of just roll out a one-size-fits-all approach. That's another one of our competitive advantages when we talk about, you know, the wider marketplace. But in the sense of actually getting it out and doing it, I think there should be a recognition that managing agents run pretty lean in terms of resource, and oftentimes we do want to or need to lean on the insight and expertise of the prop tech businesses to help deliver it, rather than have the ability to deliver it all in-house without kind of referring back. And so the ones where we've had the most success in the past, certainly in terms of delivering technology to our end users, is where we've had a really good relationship with the tech company, and it's not just a handoff of a software product or platform and then they disappear into the sunset. They've been involved subsequently, and they've helped provide training or insight or update, and they've got a good help desk fundamentally. And for me, that conversation makes all the difference in terms of ensuring success. Just having the right people in the background, and I don't mean the right technical people necessarily, I just mean people who are able to help our users get the most out of the product.
And again, I know, you know, when we first started doing business together 6 years ago, it was the customer service bit was a key part of that. So as you say, it's not just about delivering the technology and then.
I think that's almost the easy. That's almost the easy bit, actually.
It is,
you know, because we know if we've got a good idea of what we want, and what we need to be able to achieve, you know, we can go to market and get that fairly quickly. There are a lot of products out there, you know this, in all sorts of spaces. In fact, that's part of the problem sometimes, is too much choice. But once you've nailed that down, you know, we can do that pretty quickly. But making it successful, the change management piece is the difficult bit, which we often need a little bit of assistance with.
It's funny, as a business, we're moving much more towards, and we always have been sort of consultative in our approach initially, but I think, you know, as time goes on, we're moving much more towards a sort of a consultative and then an implementation, mobilization, sort of as a key stage part of that. So rather than it being, oh yeah, fine, we'll just do that and then we'll do that at the end, it's actually, no, let's figure out how we're going to do that for each specific portfolio. Because I think in the past we've had sort of issues where we've arrived, not with yourselves, but we've arrived with at a building and said, da-da, here we are, and literally the on-site, the front of house team have gone, and you are who? And they have no advance warning at all of who we are. And they go like, well, we didn't ask for this. And you go, no, but your boss's boss has implemented this and has cast his magic wand and said it, and it will happen. And actually, and that's when you've got the problem. And we always say sort of, you know, the first 100 days and actually educating those front of house staff is critical, because they are ultimately the decision makers, because they're going to go back to their surveyors and their directors and the asset managers and say, well, does it work? And if they go no, then it's very difficult for the surveyors then to justify that cost. But if the building manager is like going, yes, it absolutely works and it does this and this and this, it's a hard decision then for the surveyor to turn around and go, nah, we're going to axe that.
Yeah, and look, that's why MAPP has got we've got a high level of delegation in terms of authority to make decisions. I tend to introduce solutions to the business, and then it's up to the site teams and the wider business teams to identify whether that works for them or not. There's very few times when we actually mandate this is what you've got to use. There's 2 or 3 spine systems in the business where you've got to use it, otherwise you don't get paid, basically, right? So it's payroll and expenditure, that type of stuff. But in terms of operational solutions, we've genuinely got a choice. That obviously conversely doesn't necessarily mean that things always move as quick as we would like them to in some cases, but it does typically mean that the right product is available, you know, for the site.
It's difficult because I know you have, as you say, you got sort of 2 or 3 sort of systems that run down everything that you do, they are, from our point of view, and it's not just you, but it's the issue that we have as a business, is they are tend to be centrally run with input from sort of the regions from the individuals. Yeah. Our challenge is that we're providing a digital platform to each and every single building that then needs buy-in from those individuals. So it's almost like it's almost sort of decentralized. So it's a central system, because actually at the top of the pyramid, the guys in the ivory towers here can access that information, but it's fed by and nurtured by the people on the ground. And our situation is we're a SaaS business, but we're a service business, and how many people then do you take on? Is we was talking about scale and everything else. Yeah. I mean, we want to do scale. How do you then justify those outreach success teams to go out and make sure that everyone is being looked after and cared for and everything else?
The reality is that property management is not a readily scalable sector.
No, it's not.
And it's a much more complex sector than a lot of people give it credit for. We spent a couple of years developing a CAFM kind of purchase system with one of the biggest names in the country, software houses, and they were quite taken aback by how complicated it was to deliver that, because of we're working for 100 clients across 1,000 sites, and to deliver the layers of complexity in terms of approval levels and security layers and who can see what and all those other things, as well as the rollout. It's not something that the corporate world, with that kind of one VAT number, typically has to contend with. So it does pose its own challenges for sure.
And do you think, it was one of the things that again came up at MIPIM 5, 6, 7 years ago, it almost seems like the managing agents to sort of run out of, I don't know, sort of ideas, and there seem to be more and more sort of developers, landlords who seem to be taking more of those duties on in-house. And do you think that trend has now slowed because it is actually, people recognise that property management is a skilled nugget, is not something you just pick up and do?
I've thought for 3 or 4 years now, pre-pandemic as well, but more so post-pandemic, that brand is more important than ever. And WeWork might have been a forerunner of that in a sense, putting aside the flex piece completely, but in terms of a brand that might attract people to go to a space. And we've seen over the last 12 or 18 months, you will have seen a couple of large clients buy in property management teams, and US businesses particularly, but others will be doing the same thing. And my sense is that we will see a little bit of consolidation, and we potentially will see at least some aspects of management taken back in-house by some of the larger businesses where they feel that they want to have direct control over brand and sites and management. It's an expensive part of the business to run, but if they feel they can make the numbers stack up, then I sense some of those will be doing that for sure, particularly with the smaller agencies and the very focused sites. And it makes, I think that probably does make sense.
I think, it's the general evolution. Again, we see, which always makes me slightly laugh, but we see clients doing more and more of their sort of, just doing more in-house, basically, so having less sort of external agencies. Yeah. And we've had a couple of clients in the last 2 or 3 years who sort of said, right, we are now going to build our own system and do this. And I kind of I wryly smile, because that 18 months, 2 years down the line, because it's happened since the early 2000s, is that they are going to fall on their face, because it's just more complicated than they understand. And even the people that are not operating it daily, but are sort of touching into that space daily, they don't fully understand the layers that are involved in terms of the marketing, the branding, the design, the technical. 60% of our team is basically, keeping the thing on the road. And it takes, the bigger you get, the more of a team you need. And developers are not cheap, and you've got to be putting an awful lot of money into this and then that's just to keep it going. And then if you want to evolve it, we've had these conversations, it takes huge amounts of money to do that. And then the payback isn't actually as quick as everyone would think it is.
No, but look, there are very specific use cases. People like Great Portland, and there's 2 or 3 others in the West End where you've got very specific asset class, quite high end, and you own the end-to-end user experience. That makes complete sense to me. And, as much as we might love to manage their assets for them, the reality is that they're very good at doing it themselves.
And you did it once, though, didn't you?
We've got a site, but they will take it back at some point, no doubt. And so there are some kind of landlords who are good at that. They're focused on doing that well, but also they've got the asset type that means they can. We're running sites all over the country, and some of those don't bear much money being spent on them. And if you're a client, I don't know why you would want to manage them. Yeah. Because it would be unduly onerous and quite expensive to do so internally. So it will be only with those clients that sense that there's something to be won there, and there aren't many of those.
No. It's interesting, isn't it? Because again, we talked about the demise of the managing agent, but companies like yourselves are sort of bucking that trend. I think you're right. I think the smaller, more agile portfolios will take it on in-house.
It's only demise in the sense that some of the larger Jones Lang pulled out of Europe, for instance. There are other cases of those teams becoming smaller. They don't see that as core to what they do and haven't done for years. For decades in some cases, whether they call themselves a tech firm masquerading as a real estate business or whether they call themselves something else, management perhaps makes up 5 to 10 or maybe at most 15% of their income, barely that. So it's a long way down on the decision-making matrix for them and will continue to be unless they take a different view, which creates an enormous amount of opportunities for someone who is focused on that space.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I also noticed we talked about the B Corp.
Yeah.
So accreditation. So talk me through that, because I don't know a huge amount about that.
Well, the B Corp is the kind of accreditation that proves that you've put your money where your mouth is in terms of sustainability and the social value.
Okay.
And it's reasonably onerous to achieve, which it absolutely should be. It took us 12 or 15 months to get over the line. We were the first real estate business of any scale to achieve it, which is nice in itself. But the reality was that when we looked at it and the matrix in terms of what you have to achieve to get it, we were kind of doing all these things already because that's the type of business we were. It wasn't like an alien concept to us at all. Yeah. So it felt like a really natural fit. Now, it might be in the future that it's not the best way of representing who we are as a business, but it felt like an important step in terms of just ensuring that we were going about the kind of social value aspects of the business that we're trying to achieve in the right way. We could hold it to an externally audited standard. It's genuinely not a marketing strapline.
Yeah, that's my next question.
Yeah, look, if it helps, it helps.
Yeah.
There aren't many. Well, there aren't many clients who are B Corp certified, right?
Okay.
So they will take a view on whether they think it's important or not. If it's not important for them, then it might not be important for them that we've got it. But it's certainly important for us and the type of people that we recruit and want to recruit. So it is, frankly, it's more staff and people facing and more about what we are and who we want to be than it is about can we acquire another client with it. My answer would be no. I don't think we're ever going to win a client because we've got B Corp. There's a host of other things that come, in the first 20 list. It might be a nice to have at the end of that. I'm not even sure it's a question in most of the RFPs or RFIs I've returned in the last 5 years. They do want to know what we do in the space and how we do it, but they've never asked us to tick that box.
Okay, so I think we're nearly at the end of this. I cannot not mention this, obviously.
Go on.
But are you a Game of Thrones fan?
No. It's not that I don't like it.
So your alter ego is King of the North? Is that?
It's just that I've never seen it. I've never got around to watching it.
You've never seen it?
I've never got around to watching it. Look, I've seen highlights and things like that.
Okay.
It's unavoidable that you will have seen bits and pieces of it, but I've never sat down and gone through the series. Although when it was at its peak, and I travelled to the US once, the only time I've ever managed to get a smile out of a US border guard from all the times I visited was when he saw my name on my passport.
And
I got waved through. But other than that, it's been...
They didn't frisk you for swords?
No, nothing like that, unfortunately. But it was
dragons, eggs and that sort of stuff?
No, I'm afraid it's kind of passed me by, although it's a source of much amusement for many other people.
It has been.
Yeah, I used to get, what's the other one? The Iron Man, but he's Tony Stark, right?
Oh, he is, yes.
So there's that. So it's useful in that sense, I guess, yeah.
Excellent.
And
in terms of Rob Stark, what is the next 10 years?
Not one of those questions. This is a recruitment interview now.
This is not a recruitment interview.
The next 10 years. Well, look, there's
5.
There's a lot to do here.
Do you see this as a natural habitat for you? Yeah.
I think so. Look, when Nelson Bakewell was bought by Capita in 2010. Capita did what Capita does.
Okay.
And so it was time to move on from that business. We had a really good bunch of people there, some of whom are here now, which is great. I started looking in probably 2015, 2016, and I was looking in the usual places. I was looking client side, investor side. I was talking to names I won't mention, but multidisciplinary agencies that we know and love, just to see what was available and what was interesting. And because I'd already created a kind of niche role, even then at Nelson Bakewell, it wasn't easy to find a good fit. And it was only I wasn't actually looking at MAPP at the time. I hadn't really considered that as an option. It was only Nigel kind of swooping in 11th hour and recognising I was in the market and saying, why don't you come and try it here? I came. And actually, I'm still really happy to be here. There's still a lot to do. It's still a good place to be. It's still a developing organisation in a sense. As long as we continue to have interesting conversations with clients and meaningful conversations with clients, that we can still attract good people who want to work here, then the opportunities exist for us to do something different in that kind of initial vision that Nigel had, which we've still got. Then 10 years is a long time.
It is a long time.
But you can probably quote me on 5. All
Brilliant.
Things being equal, yeah.
Excellent. All right, we'll probably wrap it up there.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Always good to talk
chat.
to you.
Yeah.
And I look forward to being part of that journey for the next.
Yeah, I look forward to working with you.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, thank you.